The night my house burned didn't announce itself with sirens or chaos. It crept in quietly, like a trespassing violation wearing darkness as cover. I smelled it before I saw it, a bitter chemical sting that didn't belong in a quiet HOA cul-de-sac where clipboard parasites pretend safety is guaranteed by bylaws. One second I was walking down the hallway, checking locks like I always did after years of dealing with a power-drunk board. The next second, smoke curled under my bedroom door like a warning written in ash. The alarm screamed, sharp and panicked, the sound of a system realizing it had failed. That's when it hit me with brutal clarity. This wasn't an accident. This was an intimidation attempt taken nuclear. This was abuse of authority with fire as the enforcement tool. HOA Karen didn't send a violation notice this time. She sent flames. I kicked the door open, and the heat punched me in the chest, thick and suffocating, the living room already lit up like a signal flare. My kids were crying before they were even awake, fear cutting through sleep as smoke flooded the house. I moved fast, controlled, the way you do when panic will kill you faster than fire. Grabbed my daughter first, then my son, shouting orders to my wife through the haze. The hallway felt longer than it ever had, every breath tasting like plastic and gasoline. The walls crackled as if the house itself was screaming, the sound of home being erased in real time. I didn't think. I executed. Out the back door, barefoot onto cold grass, lungs burning, arms shaking, family alive. Behind us, our house roared like it was proud of what it was doing. Across the street, wrapped in a blanket like she was the victim, stood HOA Karen, calm, still, watching. The same woman who had threatened us for years with fines, liens, and fake enforcement letters. The same backyard stalker who smiled every time she said rules are rules, like it gave her permission to ruin lives. She looked shocked in the way practiced liars do, hands to her mouth, eyes wide, selling the performance to the neighbors pouring out of their homes, but I saw it. The satisfaction she couldn't fully hide. The power trip that had finally escalated into home invasion energy. She had crossed a line that couldn't be walked back. My kids clung to my legs, shaking, my wife coughing, eyes red with fear and fury. Something inside me went quiet. Not rage, control. The kind that comes when you understand a threat has shown its full face. Before we move forward, drop a comment from where are you watching right now? Because what happened next wasn't loud or fast. It was slow, methodical, and it ended a reign of HOA terror permanent. The firefighters worked while police asked questions that felt small compared to what I was holding back. I answered calmly. Dates, times, no emotion. I'd learned a long time ago that bullies collapse when you stop feeding them fear. Karen hovered nearby, inserting herself into every conversation, crying on cue, telling anyone who would listen how devastated she was for us. She even hugged my wife, whispering apologies that sounded rehearsed. I watched her hands. Steady, no tremor. That told me everything. As the smoke thinned, patterns started to show. Accelerant residue near the foundation. A trail leading toward the fence line Karen had complained about for years. The same fence she'd threatened to deal with after we refused to pay another bogus fine. Neighbors started whispering, remembering things they'd ignored before. Her late-night pacing. Her emails sent at 2 a.m., her obsession with teaching lessons. Fear was evaporating, and with it, her power. We stood there until dawn, watching the last embers die, our house reduced to a blackened skeleton. Karen finally retreated when the cameras showed up, her performance complete. My family was taken to a motel that smelled like bleach and old coffee, a temporary shelter that felt safer than the neighborhood we'd trusted. That first night, I sat awake in a hard chair, listening to my kids breathe, replaying every threat Karen had ever made. I wasn't angry. I was focused. She thought fire would scare us into silence. She didn't realize she'd just documented her own collapse. By morning, I had a plan. Not fists, not shouting, paper, records, witnesses. The rule book she worshipped was about to be turned into a weapon. Karen had built her authority on harassment escalation and intimidation attempts, confident no one would ever push back hard enough. She was wrong, and she had no idea how completely wrong she was. Because while she slept in her pristine house, convinced she'd finally won, I was already collecting the evidence that would strip her of everything she used to control, and that was just the beginning. Karen didn't start with fire. She started with paper. That's how every HOA cult operates. Soft at first, pretending to be about community while quietly training everyone to flinch. Years before the flames, before the smoke alarms and barefoot escapes, she learned exactly how much pressure it took to make people comply. She learned who backed down at the first warning and who needed fines. She learned whose fear was loud and whose was buried. And once she learned that about you, she never forgot it. We moved into that neighborhood because it was marketed as orderly, which in HOA language really means controlled. Clean lawns, matching mailboxes, smiling neighbors who don't ask questions. Karen had been HOA president for nearly a decade by the time we arrived, and her name carried weight the way a threat does when it's been proven. People lowered their voices when they said it. People glanced over their shoulders before criticizing her. That told me everything I needed to know before she ever spoke to us. The first violation notice came 3 weeks after we moved in. Grass allegedly too long by half an inch. I measured it myself. It wasn't. I paid it anyway, not because I agreed, but because I wanted to see what she'd do next. She smiled at the next HOA meeting when I handed it over. The look of a woman confirming she'd found a new target. From there, it escalated exactly how bullies always escalate when they sense resistance. Trash cans visible for 15 minutes too long. Curtains not the correct shade. Fence paint non-compliant, despite matching the approved color code exactly. Every letter used the same language. Abuse of authority disguised as policy. Threats wrapped in bylaws. And always her signature at the bottom, bold and confident, like she wanted us to remember who was in charge. We didn't yell. We didn't plead. We documented. Dates, photos, copies. Every intimidation attempt went into a folder that kept getting thicker. That folder scared her more than any argument ever could. Karen hated documentation. She thrived on private pressure, on whispered warnings and door-pounding enforcement visits when no one else was watching. When we started responding in writing, calmly, citing sections of the bylaws she misused, her tone shifted. The friendly menace disappeared, replaced by clipped, angry emails sent late at night. That's when the harassment escalation began in earnest. HOA goons showing up unannounced. Courtesy inspections that were anything but courteous. Clipboard parasites stepping onto our property without permission, photographing windows, peering over fences, lingering just long enough to remind us we were being watched. Neighbors noticed. Some apologized quietly. Others warned us to stop pushing back before things got worse. Karen had a reputation. A family down the block had been fined into selling after she placed a lien over a garden shed. Another couple repainted their house 3 times to satisfy her shifting standards. She didn't enforce rules, she enforced submission, and she enjoyed it. The moment she lost control of us was the moment she realized we weren't afraid of her. That's when she stopped pretending. The smiles vanished. The meetings turned hostile. She cut us off mid-sentence, ruled motions out of order without votes, leaned back in her chair like a judge delivering sentences she'd already decided. Power drunk doesn't begin to cover it. She wasn't managing a neighborhood. She was running a private kingdom fueled by intimidation and silence. We filed formal complaints, certified letters, requests for independent review. Each one was ignored or dismissed with boilerplate language that said nothing and threatened everything. That's when the stalking began. Karen's car parked across the street at odd hours. Her footsteps near our fence after midnight. Security cameras suddenly flagged as unapproved right after we installed them. She didn't want witnesses. She wanted access. The night before the fire, she sent one last email. Short, cold. You've left us no choice. No explanation. No citation. Just a line meant to rattle us. I saved it, printed it, filed it. She thought it was a warning. It was a confession waiting for context. Karen believed power meant immunity. She believed years of unchecked control had insulated her from consequence. She believed that if she pushed hard enough, we'd fold like everyone else. What she never understood was that her authority only existed because people let it. And once fear breaks, authority collapses fast. When the fire took our house, she thought she'd ended the problem. She thought the terror would do what fines and threats couldn't. Instead, she handed me clarity. She showed me exactly how far she was willing to go, and that made everything that followed inevitable. Because when a wannabe tyrant turns intimidation into home invasion behavior, the rules change. And Karen had just walked into a game she didn't understand, against someone who wasn't playing to win arguments anymore. She was playing to end it. And that's when I started digging deeper into who she really was, and how many cracks were already running through the empire she thought was unbreakable. Karen didn't operate alone. No matter how much she liked to present herself as the final authority, every tyrant needs a structure, a web that spreads responsibility thin enough to hide guilt, but thick enough to enforce fear. The HOA board was that web, a collection of names on letterhead who pretended they were volunteers while quietly enjoying the shield Karen provided. They let her speak for them. They let her decide for them. And when things went wrong, they planned to disappear behind procedure. The board meetings were theater. Agenda items shuffled like distractions, while real decisions happened before anyone sat down. Karen controlled the order of discussion, the length of comments, the interpretation of bylaws. She weaponized confusion. When residents asked questions, she cited sections no one had memorized, flipping pages with the confidence of someone who knew no one would challenge her in real time. That confidence came from years of unopposed dominance. She trained the room to stay quiet. Her favorite tool was security, not police, not city code enforcement. Private HOA goons she labeled as compliance officers, dressed just official enough to intimidate without accountability. Wannabe cops with clipboards and radios, showing up unannounced, knocking hard, stepping over property lines like they owned them. Fake enforcement dressed up as community safety. Every visit was a message. We can reach you whenever we want. I started mapping the structure the way you map a hostile environment. Who reported to whom? Who signed checks? Who approved contracts? Karen sat at the center, but threads ran everywhere. The board treasurer who never questioned invoices. The vice president who wasn't aware, but voted yes anyway. The management company that processed fines without verifying violations. It wasn't chaos. It was coordinated neglect. Publicly, Karen preached compliance. Privately, she escalated. Emails sent after midnight. Phone calls that hung up when answered. Notices taped to our door that hadn't been logged officially. Each one was a trespassing violation disguised as administration. When we installed cameras, she sent a notice claiming they violated privacy rules, despite the bylaws explicitly allowing them. When we cited the section back to her, she ignored it and issued another fine anyway. That's how abusers operate. They don't care if they're right. They care if you're tired. The night patrols started after we challenged her authority openly. HOA goons walking the block after dark, flashlights sweeping windows, radios crackling loud enough to be heard inside our house. Neighbors closed blinds. Kids were pulled away from windows. Karen called it visibility enforcement. I called it stalking, and I documented every second of it. Residents whispered stories when Karen wasn't around. Liens threatened over political yard signs. Fines issued selectively to critics while favorites were ignored. One family received a violation for chalk drawings on their driveway, while another hosted loud parties with no consequence. The rulebook wasn't a guide, it was a cudgel, and Karen swung it at anyone who dared remind her she wasn't royalty. The abuse escalated in phases. Paper, presents, pressure, then punishment. Each step designed to test how much fear it took to force compliance. When fines didn't work on us, she moved to access. Inspectors peeking through windows. Accidental damage to our mailbox. Anonymous complaints logged in her handwriting style. It was clumsy. It was arrogant. And it revealed how used she was to operating without scrutiny. The board knew. They had to. Complaints piled up. Emails forwarded. Requests for intervention ignored. Silence became their strategy. If they didn't respond, they could claim ignorance later. That silence was complicity, and complicity is expensive when daylight hits it. After the fire, I requested HOA records formally. Minutes, emails, security contracts, maintenance logs. The management company stalled, claimed delays, lost files, then sent partial documents missing critical dates. That alone told me there was something worth hiding. Organizations that are clean don't panic when asked for paper. Karen sent out a neighborhood-wide email calling the fire a tragic accident and warning residents not to speculate or spread misinformation. That email wasn't compassion. It was containment. She was trying to control the narrative before facts could form. The tone was firm, authoritative, the same voice she used every time she tried to shut someone down. But this time the room didn't respond the same way. Neighbors started talking to each other, comparing notes, realizing patterns. Fear evaporates fast when people realize they weren't alone. Karen's power depended on isolation. Once isolation broke, the structure started to creak. The HOA board attempted damage control, emergency meetings, closed sessions, vague reassurances. They temporarily suspended Karen pending investigation, a move designed to look decisive without admitting guilt. It fooled no one. The suspension wasn't accountability. It was panic. I watched the structure collapse the same way I watched my house burn, slowly at first, then all at once. Every abusive system believes it's permanent until pressure reveals the cracks. Karen thought she was untouchable because she'd never been touched by consequence before. She forgot the simplest truth about power-drunk systems. They only work in the dark, and the lights were coming on. Once the structure cracked, evidence started bleeding out of places Karen never thought to seal. Abusers are meticulous about control, not cleanliness. They collect leverage, not protection. And the moment scrutiny replaces fear, their shortcuts become visible. I stopped reacting and started auditing. Every document, every email header, every timestamp mattered now. This wasn't about revenge. This was about making her own behavior testify against her. The fire marshal's preliminary report confirmed what my nose already knew that night. Accelerant, not a faulty wire, not an appliance failure. A deliberate ignition point placed low and fast burning, designed to trap rather than warn. That single paragraph shifted everything. Accidents are tragic. Intent is criminal. I requested the full report, then the supplemental analysis, then the chain of custody logs. Karen's name appeared early, referenced by witnesses who remembered her lingering presence near our property in the weeks leading up to the fire. Patterns don't lie when you let them finish speaking. Neighbors came forward quietly at first, then with growing confidence. One had security footage of Karen's car idling near our fence line after midnight, headlights off, engine running. Another remembered her bragging months earlier about knowing ways to force compliance that don't involve paperwork. Someone else recalled her asking about our smoke alarm system during a so-called safety walkthrough she'd never logged officially. Each story alone sounded strange. Together, they sounded deliberate. I pulled HOA emails going back years, searching for tone shifts, escalation markers, language changes. The last 6 months told the story clearly. Threats became absolute. Warnings lost citations. The phrase "no choice" appeared repeatedly, especially in messages sent late at night. One email stood out. Sent 48 hours before the fire. Subject line blank, body short. This ends now. No bylaw reference. No vote. Just a declaration. She deleted it from her sent folder, but recipients still had copies. Arrogance makes people sloppy. Insurance investigators moved quickly once intent entered the conversation. Claims were frozen. Statements were re-recorded. Karen's timeline started to fray under repetition. She couldn't keep her story straight about where she was that night, who she spoke to, why she'd deleted messages. Every correction contradicted the last. Lies don't collapse all at once. They sink slowly, dragging everything attached to them down. I organized the evidence the way Karen organized fear. Clean, indexed, labeled. A digital timeline mapped emails, sightings, fines, threats, and escalation. Every entry backed by documentation, screenshots, witness affidavits, metadata. Nothing emotional, nothing speculative, just facts lined up like teeth. This was the part she never prepared for. She'd relied on intimidation, not accountability. She didn't understand how heavy paper becomes when it stacks. Karen tried to get ahead of it. She sent another neighborhood email, this one longer, softer, calling for unity and patience. She framed herself as overwhelmed, misunderstood, targeted by rumor. The performance might have worked months earlier. Now it felt desperate. People noticed the omissions, the careful avoidance of dates, the refusal to address evidence directly. Silence followed her words, and is lethal to authority. The HOA board hired an outside attorney to review procedures. That attorney requested documents Karen controlled. She delayed, claimed technical issues, blamed the manager. Each delay became another data point. When records finally arrived, they were incomplete. Missing invoices, altered timestamps, security logs that jumped days at a time. The attorney noticed. So did the insurer. Cover-ups leave fingerprints even when arson tries to erase them. Investigators interviewed Karen formally. Her confidence evaporated under structured questioning. No room to grandstand. No audience to intimidate. Just yes or no. Answers tied to evidence she couldn't bully away. When confronted with the accelerant analysis, she deflected. When shown footage, she claimed coincidence. When asked about deleted emails, she blamed a phone upgrade. The more she spoke, the smaller her story became. Criminal investigators expanded the scope. Not just arson, harassment, stalking, abuse of authority, financial misuse of HOA funds tied to private security expenditures. The web she built to protect herself tightened around her instead. The board realized too late that shielding her had exposed them. Panic set in. Emergency resignations. Public statements distancing themselves. None of it stopped the momentum. I kept my family out of the noise. Motel nights turned into routines. School schedules resumed. Laughter returned in small pieces. Healing happened quietly, while accountability accelerated loudly. I documented everything daily, not out of obsession, but discipline. Bullies rely on fatigue. I refused to get tired. So, the day subpoenas were issued, Karen stopped responding to messages entirely. Her house went dark, curtains closed, cars stopped moving. The woman who once prowled the neighborhood like a warden retreated behind locked doors, learning what it felt like to be watched without control. Evidence doesn't rush, it accumulates. And by the time the final packet went to prosecutors, there was no room left for doubt. Karen hadn't just crossed a line. She'd documented the crossing herself step by step, believing no one would ever dare to hold her there. She was wrong, and the next phase would no longer happen quietly. The confrontation didn't happen in a scream or a spectacle. It happened the way real power collapses, in a room where words are recorded and silence carries weight. The HOA called an emergency meeting, framing it as a routine update. Everyone knew it wasn't. Chairs filled early. Neighbors who had avoided eye contact for years sat up front. Karen arrived late, dressed carefully, posture rigid, carrying the last scraps of authority like armor. She expected fear. She walked into resolve. The meeting opened with procedural nonsense. Minutes read too quickly. Budget lines glossed over. Karen tried to steer the room the way she always had, controlling tempo, cutting off side conversations, reminding everyone of decorum. It didn't work. The air had changed. When the floor opened for comments, a hand went up she didn't recognize. Then another, and another. She tried to deny them. The board hesitated. That hesitation was everything. Power depends on instant obedience. She didn't get it. A neighbor stood and spoke calmly about late-night patrols. Another followed with printed screenshots of emails Karen had sent threatening fines without votes. Someone else played security footage of her car idling near fences. No shouting, no insults, just facts. Each one landed like a measured strike. Karen interrupted, voice rising, accusing people of speculation and hysteria. The room didn't flinch. When the fire marshal's report was read aloud, accelerant and intent stated plainly, Karen's face tightened. The mask slipped. I stood last. Not angry, not loud. I placed a binder on the table and opened it to a tabbed timeline. Dates, emails, witness affidavits. The final message she'd sent 48 hours before the fire sat there in black and white. This ends now. I read it once. Then I closed the binder. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was decisive. Karen tried to regain control by invoking legal counsel, threatening defamation, warning of consequences. The board looked at each other, finally understanding the scope of what shielding her had cost them. The insurer's denial letter was mentioned. Accounts frozen were mentioned. Personal liability was mentioned. That was the moment the board broke. Not loudly, internally. You could see it happen as they leaned away from her. Chairs shifting, eyes avoiding contact. She had ruled by proximity. Now, proximity felt dangerous. A motion was made to remove her immediately. Not temporarily. She laughed. Actually laughed. The sound was sharp and brittle, confidence curdling into disbelief. She accused everyone of betrayal, of forgetting who kept the neighborhood safe. The word echoed wrong. Safe. The vote was called anyway. Hands went up one after another, until only hers remained down. The count was unanimous. Karen's authority ended in a room she used to dominate, without a single raised voice. She tried to speak after the vote. The chair ruled her out of order. The words hit harder than any insult ever could. She gathered her things slowly, eyes scanning the room for allies that no longer existed. No one met her gaze. HOA went dead silent. She walked out alone. Outside, cameras waited. Karen paused, tried to summon the performance one last time. Tears ready, statement rehearsed. A reporter asked about the accelerant findings. Another asked about deleted emails. A third asked why multiple witnesses placed her near the property. She didn't answer. She turned away, blanket gone, exposed to daylight she could no longer control. The collapse didn't stop there. The board released records under pressure, minutes and invoices revealing years of unilateral decisions and unauthorized spending. The management company terminated their contract overnight. Banks froze accounts tied to HOA funds Karen had redirected. Insurance carriers sent reservation of rights letters that read like verdicts. Each institution that once enabled her withdrew at the same time, a synchronized retreat from risk. Karen attempted to file appeals, motions heavy on outrage and light on evidence. They were denied quickly. Judges don't tolerate intimidation dressed as argument. Depositions followed. Under oath, her contradictions multiplied. Where she'd been, who she'd called, why she'd deleted messages. Every answer tightened the net. Her attorney's confidence faded with each transcript page. Criminal charges advanced in parallel, quiet and methodical. Arson, stalking, harassment, abuse of authority. The words looked different on official letterhead than they ever had in HOA emails. Investigators traced money, connecting HOA funds to private expenses. The pattern was unmistakable. The power she claimed was stewardship had been self-service all along. Financial pressure did what outrage never could. Liens appeared. Loans were called. The house she used as a stage for HOA gatherings entered foreclosure. Notices went up. Neighbors read them twice. Authority evaporates when the paperwork turns against you. The woman who fined others for petty non-compliance missed payments herself. Karma didn't rush. It scheduled appointments. Karen tried to intimidate from the shadows. Late-night messages through intermediaries. Veiled threats about consequences. I didn't respond. I documented. Every contact became another entry in a growing file prosecutors appreciated. Bullies need reaction. Starve them and they wither. The final public hearing was brief. Evidence had already done the talking. Liability was found. Damages set high enough to matter. Restitution ordered. Permanent removal from HOA leadership imposed. The gavel came down without drama. Power trip ended instantly. Outside the courthouse, I declined statements. Victory didn't need volume. My family hugged me on the steps. Relief soft and real. Karen exited through a side door, eyes down, past cameras she once commanded. Not one of them could look me in the eye. The humiliation wasn't loud. It was complete. And while the system finished dismantling what she built, I turned back to rebuilding what she tried to erase, knowing the final phase would be quieter, colder, and permanent. Retaliation doesn't always look like confrontation. Sometimes it looks like patience sharpened into precision. While Karen's name cycled through court calendars and foreclosure notices, I shifted into execution mode, the phase where outcomes are locked and nothing is left to chance. This wasn't about watching her fall. It was about making sure she never stood back up with a different title and the same instincts. Abuse only truly ends when the system that enabled it is re-engineered. I worked with investigators the way I'd learned to work with specialists under pressure. Clear facts, clean timelines, no speculation. Every follow-up answered before it was asked. When prosecutors requested supplemental statements, they arrived within hours. When insurers needed clarification, documentation followed immediately. Momentum matters in accountability. Delays create gaps. Gaps create doubt. I refused to allow any space where her narrative could crawl back in. The HOA's insurers moved fast once liability was formalized. Coverage exclusions were enforced. defense obligations withdrawn. The board members who once hid behind Karen's certainty suddenly faced personal exposure. Some tried to negotiate quietly, offering cooperation in exchange for leniency. Investigators listened. Deals were cut. Emails were surrendered. The truth expanded outward, implicating not just Karen, but the culture that let her operate unchecked. Accountability doesn't stop at the loudest offender. It keeps going until silence has nowhere left to hide. Regulatory agencies stepped in next. State oversight reviewed HOA governance practices. Term limits were mandated. Independent audits required. Open records compliance enforced. The bylaws Karen used as weapons were rewritten into guardrails. Transparency wasn't suggested. It was imposed. The system learned the lesson she never did. Power without oversight breeds monsters. I testified calmly when asked, not as a victim, but as a witness to process. I described patterns, escalation markers, how intimidation attempts evolve when paper fails, how trespassing violations become stalking, how fake enforcement turns into home invasion behavior when no one intervenes early. The room listened. These weren't theories. They were case studies written in ash. Karen's appeals collapsed under their own weight. Each filing recycled arguments already answered by evidence. Judges denied them with efficiency that felt surgical. No lectures, no drama, just clean refusals. Criminal proceedings concluded quietly, sentencing emphasizing restitution, restriction, and deterrence. The word homeless wasn't spoken in court, but the outcome spoke clearly enough. She left with what she could carry, and a future stripped of leverage. I didn't track her aftermath. I tracked my family's recovery, therapy appointments, school schedules, rebuilding inspections. Healing happens alongside accountability, not after it. We poured new foundations where fear used to live. My kids signed their names in wet concrete, laughing, reclaiming space that once belonged to smoke. Neighbors showed up with tools and food, turning isolation into community. Karen had ruled through division. Her removal reversed it. The new HOA board adopted measures that made future abuse harder by design. Shared camera access for common areas, independent compliance reviews, clear escalation paths that ended with city authorities, not private enforcers. Emergency protocols practiced instead of filed. Sunlight everywhere. Monsters struggle when everyone can see. People asked why I kept pushing after the verdict, why I didn't let it end there. I told them the truth, because abusers count on fatigue. They wait for outrage to cool and attention to drift. Ending a pattern requires follow-through long after the headlines fade. Discipline isn't obsession. It's survival with memory. Months passed. Walls went up. Paint dried. Normal returned slowly, honestly. I slept without rehearsing exits. My wife laughed without flinching at sirens. Ordinary mornings became the victory. Backpacks by the door. Coffee cooling on the counter. Quiet that didn't threaten. Karen tried to reframe herself online, posting about injustice and persecution. Comments filled with receipts. Screenshots don't argue. They wait. Employers withdrew offers. Friends stopped answering. The world shrank to the size of her choices. Authority is loud until it isn't, and then it echoes only in empty rooms. The final step was the coldest and the most effective. I made sure every document, every finding, every corrective action was archived and accessible. Advocates received copies. Neighbors learned how to file records requests. Knowledge spread, power dispersed. The retaliation wasn't fire. It was daylight, permanent, and unflinching. By the time we moved back in, the system around us had changed. Not perfectly, permanently. And that mattered more than watching any single person fall. Because when the structure changes, the behavior that fed on it starves. And that's how you end something for good. The final victory didn't arrive with applause or headlines. It arrived quietly, the way real endings do, when nothing is left to contest and no one is left to intimidate. We moved back into the rebuilt house on a cool evening, boxes stacked by the door, the smell of fresh paint replacing smoke that once tried to claim us. My kids ran room to room, mapping new memories over old scars. The house stood again, stronger, cleaner, honest. Fear had no place to hide anymore. Karen was gone, not relocated, Not rebranded. Gone from the neighborhood. Gone from authority. Gone from relevance. Her house emptied. Notices posted. Doors locked by someone else's keys. The woman who once ruled through fines and threats walked past cameras without a word, carrying a paper bag and nothing else. Not one of them could look me in the eye. The power trip ended instantly. The HOA functioned without her like a body relearning balance. Meetings opened to the public, records posted online, votes counted aloud, disputes handled early, in daylight, with witnesses. The monster didn't return because the conditions that fed it no longer existed. People remembered. That memory mattered more than punishment. At night, I sometimes stood at the fence and listened. The neighborhood sounded different, less tense, more human. Laughter carried. Doors closed without fear. People intervened early now, asking questions instead of whispering. Fear thrives in silence. Safety grows in shared responsibility. HOA went dead silent in the ways that mattered. The kind that means intimidation lost its voice. Messages came from strangers who'd faced similar abuse. They asked how we did it. I answered carefully. Document everything. Organize it cleanly. Persist longer than the bully can. Systems improve when ordinary people refuse to get tired. Justice isn't dramatic. It's consistent. We planted a tree in the backyard without announcing it. Roots went down. Seasons passed. Trauma didn't vanish, but it loosened its grip when truth replaced secrecy. We slept without rehearsing exits. Morning light reset the story. The past stayed where it belonged, documented and resolved. Karen became a footnote, a cautionary tale told softly. The lesson traveled farther than she ever did. Power without accountability is fragile. Courage is steady. We didn't become heroes. We became neighbors who refused to be erased. When the last file closed and the last appeal died, there was nothing left to say. The ending wasn't about her at all. It was about refusing to disappear and then building something sturdier in the open. Together, we chose daylight over fire, process over panic, patience over rage. They backed off my property without a single word.